apologize, Teresa. I think I grabbed your name off of your email and maybe it's your maiden name. Thanks to everyone for their bravery, even those that asked me to keep their story anonymous. Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization was a landmark decision of the U.S. Supreme Court back in June, which the court held up that the Constitution of the United States does not confer the right to abortion. The court's decision overruled Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, giving individual states full power to regulate any aspect of abortion not protected by federal law. When the Chicago Tribune asked me how I felt about today's anniversary, my response was horrified and sad. I think we are in a climate where logic is no longer a part of many conservative arguments against abortion, healthcare, and privacy. Opponents are using chaos techniques, creating a culture of fascism. Why talk about this at church? This is not nice, Reverend Denise. I heard someone say 2 weeks ago, no politics at church. I think it's a spiritual issue. I think it's an ethical issue. Just as we talk about environment and the ozone, and just as we talk about immigration and amnesty, I think these are huge ethical issues. And without jobs that are supportive of families and pay that is a living wage and benefits, without child care and preschool and extended education expenses and affordable housing and systems of care, I really think the word choice is a misnomer. Can anyone actually be exercising choice if they don't have options? If their decisions are constricted by access to funds and luck and the ability to take time off work to go travel, or an invasion of privacy, is that really a choice? In the brand new, released this week, Article 2, Proposed Values and Covenant, the Article 2 Study Commission issued a statement that says, as Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, courage, and we build it all on a foundation of love. So today I aim to inspire you to take up this issue, maybe in a new way than you have before, by participating in talks and upcoming events that I'll tell you about later, and just look at it from a broader picture of privacy, or even considering how you could call, you could write, you could even help nearby states to relieve some of the pressure on Illinois being this island. When I started as a chaplain in 2017, that was the largest abortion clinic in Wisconsin, I imagined abortions happened all the time in clinics across the land. That wasn't true. There were 3 places in Wisconsin you could get an abortion. I thought abortion must take really special equipment, not found everywhere. It does not. It is the exact same procedure as when you have heard of people getting a D&C, a clearing of the uterine lining after a miscarriage. Many of you have undergone these procedures and told me about them, and some of you had miscarriages even after fertility treatments, where the tissues didn't quite form. Some of you had an abortion because you needed one, or maybe you helped someone get one. I want to give you a little picture of this. Louise has a few pictures of some of the people I served with at Planned Parenthood. You'll see, this was the goddess. She was painted on the sides of the buildings and stuff like that. We came to call her like the Planned Parenthood goddess. You'll see these are really radical looking people, right? This was the director of abortion care for Planned Parenthood Wisconsin. This is the director of patient care. She owns a little farm. She has dogs. Next. I thought of myself as like a mini Wonder Woman, right? I was going to go in and help save the day or something. I called it super chaplain, right? I had a tool belt because, I'm queer. So, no, go back for a second, Louise. I had tissue, I had like candy, I had little inspirational cards, I had essential oils. I was like ready at any moment. Next. Trying to be this, but really it wasn't quite so glamorous. I also used to draw between patients, and I would draw both the nursing and clinic staff, and sometimes I would draw patients that gave me permission. That was kind of my prayer that I did, in a way for me to reflect between people that I saw and I met. The abortion rights established by Roe v. Wade 50 years ago were stolen last June. The Supreme Court opened a huge floodgate of chaos, where dozens of states reverted to decades and even some centuries old laws. I thought abortion, before I was a chaplain, was about a woman's choice to carry a pregnancy to term. And then I thought, no, it's really a system conspiring against people with uteruses and thus limiting choices. Respect for body autonomy is a core principle of reproductive justice. As well as in our OWL curriculum, it's affirmed every few years at General Assembly. There are tons of proclamations and resolutions that people just like us have gotten together and hammered out and written and then had people vote on as delegates at GA. It's just been a part of our faith for a long, long time. CCUU member Michelle Hitchcock said, "I've been really feeling lately like the message and conversation around choice and women's agency has fallen away. I believe women ought to have the right to make medical decisions and choices about their own bodies, including pregnancy and birth. The ability to choose freely," and she really emphasized that, freely, and have a true choice, is so important. Michelle says, as the line goes, I think abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. No woman should be coerced into either pregnancy or abortion. Choice and body autonomy for all women is critical. And when choice is removed from the conversation, we deprioritize women's agency. And that's really what women's rights are all about, agency. So much of the national talk is not about trusting people to have their own agency, which causes harm and damaged relationships. Also in those new proposed Article 2 values and covenant, it states, we honor the interdependent web of all existence. We covenant to cherish the earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. We trust people. I think that's really cool. We trust people. Our faith calls us to trust people. Our goal is that everyone has access to the support for what they need, like Barry demonstrated and talked to us about. Banning abortion does not stop people from needing abortions. Lives are put at risk when lawmakers restrict care. The chaos and confusion and devastation we've seen over the past 6 months is exactly the environment anti-abortion rights people want to have and have been working to get for decades. Now, we may feel relieved knowing that Illinois still has legal safe options. I certainly do. But one of our congregants shared with me how her health care is now part of the chaotic mess created by the loss of Roe. She goes to Planned Parenthood to get medicine injections every 3 months. And due to the flood of people coming in to Illinois from other states, she now scrambles to get an appointment, even if she tries to make it the day she leaves. They now have to limit the amount of time ahead you can schedule an appointment for to only 2 months. She needs a shot every 3 months. You can imagine this is complicated. The appointments are far more limited. So even though the law, quote, didn't affect us, it majorly affects us. I was listening on my way in on the radio, someone else in southern Illinois talking about how they moved their clinic from Tennessee to southern Illinois. Like the whole thing, they moved, right? And they used to offer a whole spectrum of care for all different people. And now the only care they can offer is abortion because they are so busy and they've never had so many people working and the clinic opens so many hours. Lack of access to health insurance and health care plays a role in who can have an abortion too, as does racism and discrimination. So again, is it really a choice if those are all coming into play? Consider who has the most access to affordable education and jobs and all the things I keep talking about. For me, this looks at this whole thing systematically. We have to systematically look at how anti-racist measures need to be infused into everything we do. It's all part of a system. Ponder too that abortion rates have been steadily decreasing over the past 2 decades, which directly correlates to access to contraception. So what else is being limited? Contraception. All right? Countries that have living wages and access to full medical care or socialized medicine and affordable health care and education, do you know they not only have very low abortion rates, they also have very low adoption rates? All of those are systems that create true choice and options for people to do what's truly best for them. One thing I emphasized over and over in the interview, if you read it in the Tribune, was that I'm not qualified to comprehend the myriad of situations that cause someone to need an abortion. That became abundantly clear to me when I started working at that clinic. I thought I knew so much and I was so educated and I didn't get it. I really didn't get it. One doctor I'm familiar with closed his clinic in Milwaukee and opened one in Rockford. My own personal physician is flying on weekends to Florida to perform abortions and remain certified to give care to those in need. Oh, and you know those states that don't allow abortions, right? That also means their medical schools cannot be certified. So they can't have board-certified physicians coming out of them anymore if they don't offer the full range of women's health care for their OBGYNs that they need. I used to think that abortion procedures must take very specialized training. If you've ever watched that movie about the south side of Chicago, the Janes, you'll learn how quickly they learned how to do abortions. Nurses could do abortions if the state allowed it. In some states, they do. Everything I thought I knew about abortion when I was a chaplain, I realized I was all wrong. I imagined I would bring people juice and sit with them as they weighed their options. That really didn't happen. I became certified in all options pregnancy counseling. Whatever it is you wanted to explore, I have a certification to help sit with you as you go through that process. But almost everyone I've ever talked to really didn't feel like they had an option. I imagined that everyone whose life was threatened by their pregnancy would be taken care of in the hospital too, right? We hear all about that. It'll be legal if they need it, right? If they really need it. Ha! I thought abortion clinics were for people who had options, but for whatever reason didn't want to carry out a viable pregnancy. Wrong again. That situation has also become worse. One day I was asked to talk to a woman I'll call Serena. She had really long hair and she was raised Catholic and she was going to law school and she had a very unusual arthritic disease. She was in her early 20s and she had been prescribed methotrexate. No one told her to take a pregnancy test before starting the medication. She was told to not get pregnant while on it. So she took the medication and later on learned she was pregnant. And the pregnancy must have formed just before starting the medicine. Her blood pressure went out of control and she was at risk for stroke. bleeding increased, and she went to the nearest hospital, that was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and they told her she needed to have an abortion immediately to save her life. Do you think they did it? No. To make matters worse, her ultrasound showed that the cells were not growing properly and that the cells had like a cranial abnormality and limb defects. And on the screen, it looked like those cells were maybe having a seizure in utero. They told her to get in her car and drive to Planned Parenthood 3 hours away. Now, she had to get a hotel room and stay the night. And at Planned Parenthood, she learned she could not have an abortion for 3 days because at that time there was a waiting period in Wisconsin. Now they can't have one at all, right? And so she went to the hotel, and if she wanted to come to Illinois, she'd have to drive another 90 miles from where she was at the time. So see, even when someone's life is in danger, they get told to get in their car and go elsewhere. The law forces all these situations. If a hospital wouldn't perform an abortion for a person like Serena when Roe was legal, what do you think happens now? Hospitals feel the harassment and the legal red tape from reporting procedures even when medically necessary, and they purposely try to keep those numbers very, very low. They don't want to have to go through proving what it means for a life to be at stake. Serena was most angry about not being told to take a pregnancy test, and she was further enraged that the hospital did not want an abortion on their records and sent her away, putting her life at risk. I shook holding on to the wheel of my car, she told me. I had to stop and puke 3 times to get here. And now I'm in some hotel, and I'm sick, and I'm shaking for days because I have to wait. And I have been praying that I would die, she told me. My blood pressure got so bad last night that I thought my head would explode, and I went to the hospital, to the emergency room. So a second hospital, right? They gave me some pills for my blood pressure and told me to get an abortion as soon as possible. Think of Serena when you hear that abortion will still be allowed when a mother's life is at risk. No, that is not an unusual story. I heard versions of that story over and over and over. I have a friend who spent most of his career working as a chaplain at Planned Parenthood in Washington, Alaska, Hawaii, and I think Oregon. One of the Planned Parenthood clinics was connected to the hospital via a tunnel underground. If a woman needed an abortion at the hospital, they would wheel her out of the hospital through the tunnel over to Planned Parenthood. She would get an abortion, and then they would wheel her back to the hospital. Maybe you read today in the Tribune about one of the couples I helped, a Hindi couple that I cared for. The mother, I'll call Sita, she was losing her sight from preeclampsia, and her blood pressure was skyrocketing. She too was sent from her OBGYN's office, immediately told to get an abortion or go blind and risk a stroke. I held her hand during the abortion, and she called out for God. I said, God is with you. Afterwards, Sita asked me to see the remains of her conception, and I had the medical assistant place it in a bowl. We covered it with a cloth. She begged for her husband to join her. I held her hand gently, and they sat side by side on the exam chair. Sita was crying and wailing, and I lifted the cloth, and they looked at this tiny blob of egg-like cells, not much different than a robin's egg that you've seen fall out of a nest. Like every single person that wanted to see their remains of conception, she immediately stopped crying. See, everyone's been taught to imagine that I will be showing them a miniature baby, and that is not the case. In fact, I was so happy I saw the New York Times ran an article this morning. I didn't get to read the whole thing yet, but it said early pregnancy does not at all look like what you think it does. And Barry's nodding her head. Nothing like that. All those people passing out plastic little babies, that is a bunch of malarkey. It is a collection of cells. Sometimes more formed, certainly, sometimes not. The skin is not formed. It is a gelatinous covering of beginnings. Sita asked to touch it, and I gave her and her husband purple medical gloves, and they stroked this tiny nickel-sized spear. He picked it up and held it in his palm and asked, could we donate these cells to another family that could carry a child? We can't use it right now, but maybe someone else could, he said to me. And I explained it just didn't work that way, and those were the very cells that were harming Sita. She shook her head, and she clasped her hands, and she said, thank you, God, for giving me this care here. In a neighborhood not far from here, I was asked to chaplain a UU youth, a young transgender man who found himself pregnant after a sexual assault in downtown Chicago. He worried about going off of his transgender hormone-affirming medications, and he worried about how to avoid harm to the fetus. He loved children, but he knew he didn't have the means to raise a child, and he worried that his compromised mental state was such that he would harm himself if forced to carry out the pregnancy. He had been an RE teacher in 2 of our congregations. I talked with him several times. I still think about him. Over and over, I would hear people say, thank you. Thank you, Allah. Thank you, God. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you, Goddess, for giving me this care. They were all complex situations. So focus on whether fertilized cells should be called life or not, for me, distracts us from a moral world to raise our children in. Making a woman or a person with a uterus nothing more than a vessel robs the pregnant person of the autonomy or free will over their own destiny. Having a child and raising it is a moral issue that we trust people to make. And anyone facing moral decisions deserves support and love and kindness. If someone has no value, if a woman has no value, then whether she wants to be a parent has no resonance. And that's unacceptable. It is an even violent way to approach the interconnected web. So again, long ago I thought abortion was about choice. And then I saw it as a system conspiring against people with uteruses and legislating them to be incubators. And the more I look at it, the more I see it as a holy conversation between a person and their circumstances and their beliefs. Whether it is a choice or not is a holy question with more variables than I am willing or able to decide for anyone else. I can support and walk people through that and accompany them, but abortion is complex. Child rearing is complex. My aim is to love people into finding their own voice, their own way, and for me, it's all about siding with love. I ask all of you to side with love.